She didn't steal. She didn't lie. She just saved a life. And for that, they took her badge. No headlines, no protest. Just a quiet nurse, walking out alone, punished for helping a homeless veteran. But what no one knew was that 3 days later, a decorated colonel would walk through that hospital door and say 12 words that would change everything. Emily Dawson didn't wear her years on her face, but they showed in the way she moved, calm, efficient, and with a kind of quiet dignity that only comes from doing one thing well for a very long time. She was 38, 11 years on the emergency floor of St. Vincent Medical Center in Ohio. She didn't chase promotions, didn't ask for recognition, but every paramedic, every young resident, every janitor on night shift knew one thing: if it was your loved one rolling through those ER doors, you'd pray it was Nurse Dawson waiting on the other side. She had a rule: every patient was sir or ma'am. Didn't matter if they were drunk, didn't matter if they hadn't showered in a week, didn't matter if they cursed or cried or bled. Everyone deserved to feel like they mattered. That's what she believed. That's what made her different. It was a Tuesday in mid-January. Snow still clung to the edges of the sidewalk like tired regrets. Emily's shift was nearly over, her back sore from 12 hours on her feet. She was double-checking vitals at Station 3 when she saw him. A man standing just inside the automatic doors. Thin frame, torn denim jacket, hair graying and uneven. He didn't walk in. He drifted as if the heat of the ER lights had pulled him in from the cold. His name was Raymond Walker. No one knew that yet. All they saw was a man who didn't belong until they saw the blood on his jeans. Emily moved before anyone else. The front desk clerk glanced up, frowned. No insurance, he mumbled. But she didn't stop. Didn't ask. She met the man's eyes, sunken, tired, but still searching for dignity. He tried to speak, but only managed, "Sorry to bother. I think something's wrong with my leg." He pulled up the fabric slowly. A gash. Red, angry, swollen. Too late for a simple bandage. Too early for an obituary, but just barely. Emily didn't call the supervisor. She didn't fill out a form. She just looked at him for a long moment, then said gently, "Sir, you're safe now." And with that, she reached for a med kit, knowing exactly what it would cost her, but not yet knowing just how far that cost would ripple. The man's hands trembled as he unbuttoned the cuff of his jeans. "I'm sorry for the trouble," he muttered, voice brittle like frost on glass. "My leg. It's been hurting real bad. Didn't know where else to go." Emily crouched beside him, her hands already gloved. She didn't speak yet, just looked. The wound was worse than she'd feared. A deep gash stretching across the calf edges, inflamed skin, taut and reddened. The skin around it pulsed with infection, and the faint, sickly smell of tissue on the brink of dying made her jaw clench. This wasn't a scrape. This was days of neglect, maybe more. She glanced over her shoulder back to the triage board, the security desk, the supervisor's glass window upstairs. No one was watching. Not yet. But then she caught sight of the sign on the wall. All procedures require authorization through emergency intake. A reminder, not just of protocol, but of everything she was about to violate. Her breath caught. She stood still for a heartbeat longer than usual, because she knew what would come next. Paperwork violations, chain of command breaches, liability exposure. In that frozen moment, the world slowed. Ray sat slumped, fingers clutching his torn denim as if to hide the damage. Not just the wound, the shame. He wasn't crying, but there was something in his eyes, an apology so old and deep it no longer needed words. A man who had learned to carry pain quietly, who had been taught, maybe trained, that asking for help was weakness. Emily looked at the wound again, then at the man. Then she made her choice. "Can you walk a few steps, sir?" she asked softly. He nodded, startled. She led him through the side corridor, past the mop closet, past the vending machines, to the old break room turned supply storage. She locked the door behind them. No forms, no clipboard, no time. Emily grabbed gauze saline antibiotic cream, a light injector. She worked with the practiced hands of someone who'd done this 1,000 times, but never quite like this. Ray winced, teeth clenched, but didn't complain. At one point he whispered, "You don't have to. I ain't got anything to offer." Emily paused, eyes still focused on the wound, and replied gently, "You offered your life. Somewhere, sometime. Maybe no one ever said thank you. So let me be the first." She finished dressing the leg, double-checked for signs of deeper infection, then opened her lunch bag. Inside was one granola bar, the last thing she had before her shift ended. She didn't hesitate, broke the seal and pressed it into his hand. "Here. You need this more than I do." He stared at it like it was made of gold. She added softly, almost too quietly, to hear, "I owe you this. And this country owes you more." For a moment, there was no sound, just the faint hum of a vending machine in the hallway, and the quiet breathing of a man who finally felt seen. When she unlocked the door, she didn't look back. She just walked out into the fluorescent light of the hallway, med-kit in hand, heart pounding. Behind her, Ray stood a little straighter, and the system had just been bent by one woman's quiet defiance. The next morning felt colder, even though the forecast said otherwise. Emily arrived 15 minutes early like always. She clocked in, checked the board, and was halfway through reviewing the overnight chart notes when her phone buzzed. A message from HR, "Please report to administration. Now." No subject, no greeting, just a summons. She knew. Inside the third-floor office, everything smelled like lemon disinfectant and paper that had sat too long in drawers. Gerald Price stood behind his desk, sleeves rolled up, jaw tight. He didn't invite her to sit. "Emily," he began, "we've reviewed yesterday's footage and your supply access records. You treated a non-admitted individual using hospital materials. No authorization, no documentation." His voice was level, practiced. Like a man who had said these things before but didn't quite believe them now. Emily didn't flinch. He continued, "There are liability issues here. Legal exposure. We can't afford to ignore protocols no matter the circumstances." For a brief moment, his gaze softened just slightly. Then it hardened again. "You're suspended until further notice pending review. Turn in your badge and locker key." Emily didn't argue, didn't ask for a hearing. She simply reached into her pocket, pulled out her badge, and set it on the edge of his desk gently, as if not to disturb the dust of a system already rotting. Gerald hesitated, just for a second. His fingers hovered above the suspension form pen, poised. Then, as if swallowing something bitter, he signed his name and turned away. As Emily stepped out, he glanced once toward the window just for a second. Then came a quiet sigh, barely audible, and he closed the file. The meeting was over. No escort, no scene. Just a hallway that suddenly felt too long, and a silence that pressed in from every corner. In the locker room, Emily gathered her things: a pair of shoes, a half-used notebook, a photo taped inside the door, her and her mother on graduation day. She closed the door softly. No slam, no goodbye. Outside, the parking lot was half empty. Snow had begun to fall again, light, careless, like nothing had happened. She sat in her car for a moment before turning the key. Her hands trembled. Her breath fogged the windshield, but her lips were steady, drawn into a thin, determined line. She whispered only once into the stillness of her dashboard, I'd do it again. Then she drove home past the clinic, past the Veterans Center, past the coffee shop, where nurses sometimes laughed after shift. Today, no one laughed. And one nurse drove home alone, with nothing left but her name, and a truth the system couldn't erase. For 2 days, it was quiet. Emily stayed home, didn't check her emails, didn't turn on the news. She folded laundry, made tea, let it go cold. Twice. The world, it seemed, had moved on, until someone didn't. A patient from the ER that night, no name, no profile picture, posted a single paragraph on a small veterans support forum. I saw what happened. That nurse, Emily Dawson, she didn't hesitate. She treated a man no one else would touch. If she hadn't, he might have lost his leg. Or worse, she's the reason he's still alive. And they suspended her for it. It was meant for a few dozen eyes, maybe 100. But someone screenshotted it. Someone else shared it. By sunrise the next day, it had reached over 100,000 views on Twitter alone. The hashtags came next: Stand with Emily, Not Just Protocol, Veterans Deserve Better comments, poured in nurses from across the country, military families, medics, social workers, students, strangers. My dad came back from Iraq with nothing but scars. This could have been him. She broke the rules. Good. Maybe the rules are broken. We need more Emilys, not fewer. Local news picked it up first. Then national outlets. Radio stations started mentioning it during morning traffic. A segment ran on a Veteran Affairs podcast. And then one city councilwoman tweeted, "If this is how we treat the people who treat our heroes, we need to take a long look in the mirror." At the hospital, the front desk was flooded with calls. Is it true? Did you really turn away a veteran? Has that nurse been reinstated yet? Receptionists stumbled through half-written scripts. Administrators ducked out of meetings. The air inside St. Vincent was suddenly thick with unease. Outside candles began to appear on the front steps. Tiny flags. Handwritten signs. Thank you, Nurse Dawson. Do the right thing. But it wasn't just symbolic. 3 nonprofit veteran organizations sent open letters to hospital leadership. One demanded an apology. Another called for Emily's reinstatement. A third simply said, "Her action saved a life. Your inaction nearly lost one." The shift had begun. What started as one nurse's quiet defiance had become something else entirely. A question echoing across coffee tables, dinner conversations, and legislative offices. When did following the rules become more important than saving a life? And somewhere in her quiet apartment, Emily read that post for the first time. She didn't comment. She didn't share it. She just sat still, fingers resting lightly on her teacup, this time still warm, and whispered, "He didn't go unseen." It was a cold Thursday morning when he arrived. No sirens, no press, no escort. Just a dark sedan with veteran plates and a man in a navy overcoat stepping into the glass lobby of St. Vincent Medical Center. Colonel Mark Ellison didn't need introductions, not here, not among the people who knew what service looked like. 30 years in the Army. Multiple deployments. A Silver Star. Now retired, and serving as a senior advisor to the Ohio Veterans Council. He walked past security with quiet purpose. "I have a meeting," he said, "with hospital leadership, regarding Nurse Emily Dawson." Word spread fast. Staff leaned out from break rooms. Whispers filled the hallways. The admin team scrambled. Gerald Price caught mid-call, straightened his tie, and rushed to the third-floor boardroom where the colonel was already waiting. A camera had been set up, standard protocol for sensitive meetings, nothing more. But this one would find its way far beyond the hospital walls. Colonel Ellison stood as they entered. No smile, no hostility, just calm, deliberate presence. "Thank you for making time," he began. Price gestured for him to sit. Ellison didn't. He placed a single photo on the table, two soldiers crouched beside a burning convoy, one with blood soaked through his sleeve. This was Kandahar, summer of 2009. The man beside me is Raymond Walker. He saved my life that day. Silence. I was bleeding out behind a twisted Humvee. Walker didn't ask for clearance. He didn't wait for backup. He ran into enemy fire with nothing but a tourniquet and a prayer. Ellison's voice never rose, but each word landed like a stone dropped in still water. Years later, that same man walked into your ER. He didn't demand special treatment. He didn't even ask for help. And one woman, a nurse, did exactly what he did all those years ago. He turned slightly toward the camera. She didn't ask for authorization. She didn't wait for forms. She saw someone in need, and she acted. Just like he once did for me. His eyes locked on Price. And you punished her. Price shifted, but said nothing. Let me be clear, Ellison continued. This isn't just about Nurse Dawson. This is about what kind of institution you want to be. One that hides behind red tape, or one that remembers why it exists in the first place. He reached into his coat pocket and placed a sealed envelope on the table. This is a formal letter of concern from the Ohio Veterans Council. There will be others. Then he added quietly but firmly, Emily Dawson reminded this hospital what service looks like, what courage looks like. And if you can't see that, perhaps you're the ones who need reviewing. He nodded once, then walked out the door as silently as he came in. The recording of that meeting would leak within hours, and by nightfall, Emily's name was no longer just whispered in anger. It was spoken in respect. By Friday morning, the hospital was no longer just a hospital. It was a symbol of silence, of system failure, of a decision that had gone too far. Cameras lined the sidewalk. Reporters waited near the main entrance. Protesters gathered at the edge of the parking lot, holding small signs. Compassion is not misconduct. Emily did what the system wouldn't. Inside, the tension thickened. The board called a press update. Gerald Price stood at the podium, shoulders squared, but his hands betrayed him. Clenching, unclenching. We are aware of recent events involving Nurse Emily Dawson. He began, eyes shifting to the cameras. While our policies are in place to protect patients and staff, we understand the public concern and are reviewing procedures. He said the words, but they didn't land. Not with the staff watching from the hallway. Not with the nurses standing in the break room, arms folded. Not with the ER tech who had quietly refused to erase Emily's name from the shift roster. Because everything had changed, and no one was pretending anymore. Later that day, a senior resident, Dr. Carla Mendez, spoke during a staff huddle. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't grandstand. If Emily hadn't helped him, she said Ray Walker would have lost his leg. Maybe even his life. No one argued. In fact, no one said anything at all. But someone later that night pinned a note on the triage board. Handwritten. Simple. Conscience is not a system flaw. By the end of the weekend, more began to appear. On lockers, clipboards, the staff lounge fridge, patience over policy. She stood alone so we wouldn't have to. Morale didn't crumble, it reformed. Paperwork was still filed. Protocols still followed. But with eyes wider. With questions asked. With hearts awake. The hospital hadn't changed its official stance. Not yet. But in the halls of St. Vincent, something else had broken. Not rules, but the illusion that silence was safer than truth. The call came a week later, not from the hospital, not from Gerald Price. It came from a board liaison, calm, professional, almost apologetic. We'd like to offer you a new position, Ms. Dawson, one that better aligns with your strengths. Emily didn't ask for details. She listened, then said simply, "I'm not interested in going back to what was." Pause. "We don't want that either," the voice replied. And so she returned. No press conference, no victory lap, no cameras waiting outside. Emily Dawson walked back into St. Vincent Medical Center through the same side entrance she'd always used. But her badge was different now. It read, Veteran Care Liaison, a role newly created. A title quietly carved from necessity. Her job wasn't just clinical anymore. It was human. She reviewed protocols for incoming veterans, created new training modules, sat in on ethics board meetings, listened to stories most had forgotten how to hear. She still wore scrubs, still carried a medkit. But now, when a veteran came through the ER doors, there was a note on their chart, "Refer to Dawson." And every Thursday morning, without fail, he came. Ray Walker. No appointment, no paperwork, no fanfare. He'd walk through the lobby, nod politely to the front desk, and place a small American flag next to the hand sanitizer station. Never said a word, just left it there. Sometimes he'd wait in the corner chair by the window, sipping free coffee. Sometimes he'd just tip his cap and walk back out. The staff came to expect it. They never moved the flag, not once. It stood there all week, quiet, unannounced, until Ray returned the next Thursday and replaced it with a new one. Emily never asked him why. She didn't need to. Some gestures don't require explanation. In time, the hospital grew quieter in a different way. Less tension, fewer whispered doubts. There was still pressure, still rules, still hard days. But now there was a name on every protocol document for veteran care. And that name meant something. Not because it shouted, but because it never needed to. It was raining the day it arrived. Not a storm, just a steady gray drizzle that blurred the windows and softened the edges of everything outside. Emily was in her office sorting intake notes from the past week. A small radio hummed in the corner. Her tea had gone cold again, but this time she didn't mind. A quiet knock at the door. A delivery. No sender listed. Inside the plain brown package was a frame carefully wrapped in cloth. She peeled it back slowly. It was her old hospital badge. Worn edges, slightly faded, still bearing the photo taken her first week on the job. Nervous smile, stiff collar, a glint of hope in her eyes. Beside it, mounted with precision, was a handwritten note on thick stationery. Some rules are meant to be broken. Thank you for knowing which ones. There was no name, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Colonel Ellison didn't need to sign it. Emily stared at the frame for a long time, not smiling, not crying, just still. She placed it gently on the shelf above her desk, beside a folded flag Ray had once left behind, and a coffee mug with no handle she couldn't bring herself to throw away. She didn't say anything, didn't need to, because sometimes the loudest thank you is the one you never have to give. And sometimes the most lasting recognition is the kind you never ask for, only earn. It had been 3 months since Emily returned to St. Vincent. The media storm had long passed. The cameras were gone. But something deeper remained, a quiet shift, like roots growing where no one could see. Protocols had changed. New procedures were in place for veteran patients. There were training modules now, ethics case reviews, even monthly roundtables for staff. And in the ER, people started pausing a little longer, asking better questions, listening more. Earlier that week, a young resident had lingered by the ER desk watching quietly as Ray left his Thursday flag behind. His name tag read, Morales. He didn't say much, but he watched everything. One afternoon, a young medical resident knocked on Emily's open office door, barely 26. Nervous eyes. ID tag reading Dr. Seth Morales, MD resident. Ms. Dawson, he asked, voice unsure. Can I ask you something? She looked up, smiled gently. Of course. He stepped inside, glancing over his shoulder as if worried someone might overhear. I've got a patient in Bay 4, former Marine, came in from a shelter, no insurance, VA's 2 hours away. He's stable, but not for long. He hesitated. Protocol says transfer. But something doesn't feel right about that. Emily didn't respond right away. She simply studied him for a moment. The way his fingers tapped the side of the clipboard. The way his voice trembled, not from fear, but from conscience. She tilted her head slightly. You already know the answer, Dr. Morales. He swallowed hard. Yeah, I do. He turned to leave, then paused. But what if I get in trouble? Emily leaned back in her chair. A soft light from the window caught the corner of the frame on her shelf, the one with her old badge and the handwritten note. She didn't look at it. She just smiled. Then I'll call the colonel. And with those 7 words, a new chapter quietly began. Not with headlines, but with a whisper of courage passed from one healer to the next. Doing the right thing isn't always safe. Sometimes it costs your job, your peace, your silence. Sometimes it means standing alone in a room full of people who look away. But if no one dares to do what's right, then right becomes just a word in training manuals. Just ink on policy pages. Just theory on a shelf gathering dust. Emily Dawson didn't choose the easy way. She didn't wait for permission. She chose a human being over a system. A wounded man over a checklist. And because of that, other people started choosing too. The resident who hesitated then acted. The hospital that rewrote its rules. The veteran who walked in limping and walked out whole. And maybe somewhere down the line a life that would have been lost will be saved because one nurse on one day refused to look away. So if you believe that quiet courage still matters, if you believe that doing what's right shouldn't come at the cost of your job, then share this story. Because the more we remember what honor really looks like, the harder it becomes to forget.